Hello, I'm Michael Thompson, Principal Horn Player with the London Sinfonietta. Welcome to the fourth in our series of lockdown live events where we explore a different instrument each week. These events are happening every Monday at 5 p.m. throughout May on the London Sinfonietta YouTube channel. Details of these events and many other events are on the London Sinfonietta website. We're extremely grateful to the Arts Council as well as the trusts and sponsors, both corporate and individual, who support our work. This week we are looking at the horn, and there will be time at the end for questions, and if you want to send a question you can do that via the YouTube chat, which is somewhere down the bottom of the page. So the horn, well, what is a horn? Well, this is a horn. This is an animal horn. I'm not sure which sort of animal it comes from, but this one sounds a note. I'm afraid that's its entire repertoire. It sounds one note. So this is the kind of short horn that we would associate with fox hunting. Those kind of horns are generally made of brass or sometimes silver, but they're that kind of length. Now, if we want more than one note, we need a longer tube. So, for instance, we could go to something like this. This is much more like the kind of horn we associate with stag hunting, particularly in France and Germany. And this one has lots of notes. It actually has another note an octave below that, but I won't keep you while I try to get that. It could take some time. These notes, the notes I just played, are called the harmonic series. They're just the natural notes that occur on any tube, or for that matter any string if you touch it at various points. If I were to make this tube longer, which I can do actually quite easily, I can take this apart, I can take this off. This is called a crook, and this is another crook which is slightly longer, so we'll get the same pattern of notes, but just lower. But as I say, exactly the same pattern, always exactly the same shape. And we have, with this kind of horn, we have crooks ranging from a tiny one like this to one about this size but wrapped 3 times round. So in fact we have a different crook for each note in the well, pretty much in the chromatic scale. So that's actually the kind of instrument that was in use in the 18th century. So those were the notes that 18th century composers had available to them. Actually, they had a few more than that, because the players figured out that if you put your hand in the bell, we call this the bell, and you move it around, you close it, you can actually kind of fake some of the notes in between. So you can fill in the gaps. When we come up to the 19th century, we have the invention of valves. Now, valves are actually just a mechanism. This is a modern horn with valves. These bits here, they're just a mechanism for adding lengths of tubing. So if I play this horn without pressing any valves down, I'll get the pattern of notes at the same pitch as the first demonstration. If I then press this valve, I add precisely the right length to make it this pitch. This is going to become relevant to what we're talking about, so bear with me. So by the 19th century, it was entirely possible to play the horn chromatically. But oddly enough, quite a lot of 19th century composers didn't really want to do that. They wanted to preserve what they saw as the character of the horn. There's something strange about the horn. It seems most at home. It seems it seems to be most like a horn. It sounds like a horn when it's somewhere close to the harmonic series. And some of the great romantic composers clearly felt this. Brahms was a great example. Really, all of Brahms's horn parts can be played on a natural horn. They probably weren't in his lifetime, but they can be. So in his first symphony, we have all open notes in the harmonic series. Wagner, someone that Brahms didn't think terribly highly of, also very close to the harmonic series. In his famous Siegfried call. Probably the composer more than any who exemplified this attachment to the harmonic series was Richard Strauss. So his famous horn solo in Till Eulenspiegel. Really quite playable on a natural horn. Again, no one would have done it, but he's sticking to this kind of tradition. It seems to be something that's in the horn's DNA. Moving into the 20th century, at last I hear you cry, a young English composer wrote something rather unusual in 1943. Benjamin Britten, in his Serenade for tenor, horn and strings, wrote a prologue for solo horn where he asked the player to play just the natural harmonics and not to correct any of the out of tune notes. He wanted the out of tune effect. This caused quite a lot of consternation when it was first performed. A lot of critics commented on the fact that the first performer, the great Dennis Brain, was unusually for him actually playing out of tune. He wasn't, or at least he was doing what the composer had asked. Ligeti took this idea to extraordinary lengths in his Hamburg Concerto, which was premiered in 2001 by the wonderful German horn player Marie-Louise Neunecker and with the conductor George Benjamin. I had the privilege of giving the UK premiere later that year, again with George and with the London Sinfonietta. I've actually also conducted the piece with the American horn virtuoso Andrew Pelletier as soloist. So I've come to know the music quite well, and it's in my personal top 3 contemporary horn concertos. So at the beginning of the 4th movement, the concerto is in 7 movements. He actually revised it in 2003 and added a 7th movement. In the 4th movement, the soloist plays completely alone at the beginning, and Ligeti specifies which harmonic series, which length of tube we are to play on, in the same way that a classical or a romantic composer might have done, but with very different results. Like Britten, Ligeti, he wants to hear the out of tune notes. Now I'm hoping that our technical wizard at the other end of the line, Adam Flynn, is going to put up the score. There it goes. I'm going to play for you just the beginning of this. Well, in fact, I'm going to play the whole page that you can see, the solo from movement 4. Ligeti himself wrote about the piece. In this piece, I experimented with very unusual non-harmonic sound spectra. In the small orchestra, there are 4 natural horns, each of which can produce the 2nd to the 16th overtone. By providing each horn or group of horns with the different fundamentals, I was able to construct novel sound spectra from the resulting overtones. These harmonies, which had never been used before, sound weird in relation to harmonic spectra. I developed both weird consonant and dissonant harmonies with complex beats. Horns blend very well together, and to enrich the sound further, the 2 clarinetists play basset horns. Even though it is replete with spectra of strange beats, the resulting overall sound is soft and mellow. This is shown, I think, to the greatest effect in the 2nd movement, which is called Signal, Tanz and Chorale. And Adam, with his wizardry, is going to play you a little sound clip. Marie-Louise Neunecker and her colleagues, they're playing the 2nd movement of Ligeti's Hamburg Concerto. It seems to me, listening to that movement in particular, that Ligeti finds a sound that we feel is familiar, but it's as though it's in the cracks in between what we're used to hearing. It's almost as though he's found a 5th dimension, a parallel universe. Olivier Messiaen also explored our world and other worlds in his extraordinary piece Des Canyons aux Etoiles, From the Canyons to the Stars. This was first performed in New York in 1974, and it was to celebrate the bicentennial of the United States Declaration of Independence. It's scored for strings, woodwind and brass, and there is a solo piano, solo horn and a huge array of percussion, including 2 solo parts. There are 12 movements. It has a duration of 100 minutes or more. Messiaen found his inspiration from a visit to Utah, and particularly to Bryce Canyon. He wrote that Canyons was written to glorify God in the beauties of his creations, from the colours of the earth and the songs of the birds to the colours of the stars and the resurrected ones in heaven. Right at the heart of this piece is the 6th movement, the Appel interstellaire, the interstellar call. This is written for the lone voice of a solo horn. Most of what Messiaen asks of the horn player is it's within our normal range of techniques. But Byron last week, our trombone player, was talking about what we sometimes call extended techniques, various tricks we have, and all brass players share quite a lot of them. So we have flutter tying, where we roll an R to make this very machine-like sound. Byron was talking about various mutes. Horns have mutes. We also, as a throwback to our 18th century forebears, we can use our hand in the bell, and where our 18th century colleagues would have tried to minimize the difference between the open and closed notes to make it smoothed out, we in modern times we accentuate the difference. So we try to get a really tight, buzzy, muted sound. There are some other extended techniques that some composers quite enjoy. Some work very well. One of the popular techniques is the sound of just air being blown through a brass instrument. So you can do it very quietly. You need to be up quite close to hear that. So sometimes we do it this way, which is a little louder. Or if we really want to cut through, we can take the mouthpiece out, turn it round, and we can really kick up quite a racket like that. Some extended techniques are slightly less successful. I do remember once doing a concert where I didn't get to play any conventional notes. I spent the entire concert making what I sometimes rather unkindly think of as silly noises. But Messiaen asked for a particular effect in the Appel, which I think Adam is going to show. Yes, there we are. There's the first page of the Appel interstellaire. Exactly halfway down, you'll see there's this very strange looking bar. There's a note written, and there's a kind of squiggly line. It looks a bit like a readout from a seismograph. And there's quite a lot of instructions here, which, if my dreadful schoolboy French serves me at all, means something to the effect of sound without timbre, unreal, with oscillations of pitch. And then underneath, some more technical instructions, half raise or lower, alternating the valves. Now there's a lot of discussion amongst horn players as to what sound Messiaen wanted here. Interestingly, the French here, he doesn't just say valves, he says les trois pistons or les trois palettes. Now this is an interesting reference to the difference between French horn players, French horn players, and the rest of the world. Most horn players nowadays use instruments with what we call German rotary valves, like this. The French, up until really quite late, up until the 1970s or 80s even, were still playing on instruments that had pistons, that's to say valves more like the conventional jazz trumpet. And if you half valve with pistons, you really do get quite a different sound to half valving with rotary valves. I first came to this piece not long after it was written, and at that time, the first horn player to perform this was an American woman called Sharon Moe in New York. But the first recording that I could get hold of was featuring a wonderful French player called György Ligeti, who I subsequently came to meet and be very fond of. And György's recording was wonderful, very idiosyncratic in terms of the French style of horn playing. But particularly this note, I listened to it and I just tried to work out how I could get as close as possible to what György was doing. I subsequently had the immense good fortune to work on this on a couple of occasions with Messiaen himself, and I have to confess that my attempts to mimic György's playing did not satisfy the composer. Whatever I tried to do with this sound was greeted with a kind of Gallic shrug and the comment, sounds like a horn. So I never quite managed to satisfy him, but I kept trying. Yvonne Loriod, who was his wife, of course, and was the solo pianist in the first performance and the first recording, she's been quoted as saying that this bar should sound like a coyote, which is a wonderful image. Looking at the part, it occurs to me that the coyote would need to be a very long way away, because it's marked 3 Ps, doing an enormous crescendo up to 2 Ps and then back down again to 3 Ps. So a very distant coyote. Messiaen himself said to me, and I know he said it to other people because I've seen this in print, he said it should sound like a dog dreaming. And he meant a domestic dog. He said all this in French through an interpreter, that he said, you know, when a dog is asleep in front of the fire and sometimes its ear will just twitch like this. And he said the dog is dreaming. We don't know what it's dreaming about, but that's what this sound is. So again, wonderful imagery, quite difficult to translate into technical instruction. The other thing which I completely failed with as far as Messiaen was concerned was the long silences. You'll see at the end of that line with the seismograph reading, there's a pause bar, fermata, and it says long. Oh boy, did he mean long. I've always taken a certain amount of pride in the fact that I can stand still and do nothing for really quite long periods of time. But not as far as Messiaen was concerned. Every time that I moved a muscle as though to play the next note, he would just say, no, long. So I failed on that front as well. Anyway, I'm going to try now to do the best I can with both the Dreaming Dog and the long silences. And I'm going to play the Appel interstellaire. The extraordinary music from Olivier Messiaen Des Canyons aux Etoiles, the sixth movement, the Appel, interstellaire. 10 days ago, I received a short piece for unaccompanied horn from the New World, actually specifically from Canada, from Toronto. It's by composer and pianist, and as he describes himself, human, which I think is rather a wonderful description, Frank Horvat. He's written a series of pieces for solo instruments called Music for Self-Isolation. We thought this might be fun to have a world premiere, and it just so happens that today is Frank and his wife Lisa's 23rd wedding anniversary, so happy anniversary. So I think it's time probably for some questions, if there are any. I'm just looking at the chat. Let's have a look. This is a setup, isn't it? I almost apologise for this. The first question is, which are the other two contemporary concertos you rate with the Ligeti? I'm sorry, that was a gift, wasn't it? I knew this would come up. It's a very personal thing. There are lots of wonderful, wonderful pieces, but for me, the other two, which I absolutely adore, are the Olivier Messiaen Concerto, which was written for Barry Tuckwell, just at the tail end of the 20th century, and the concerto by Colin Matthews, which was written for my dear friend and colleague Richard Watkins, a little bit later. Both of which I think are wonderful pieces, which will stay in the repertoire, I'm absolutely sure. Now here's a message from Graham House. Hi Graham. Does Ligeti score the entire solo part in concert pitch? Very, very good question. He doesn't if you hire the part for performance. It's written in the pitches that you would expect as a horn player. So the main part of the horn part is written in F, and then the solo part has the instructions. The instructions are in concert pitch, and the part is actually written in F. Sorry, for anyone who's not a horn player, this will make no sense at all, but for horn players, you'll completely understand. What I would say is don't buy the piano reduction practice music from Schott, because the horn part that arrives with that is in concert pitch and is therefore unusable, which is a shame. So unfortunately you can't get hold of the hired parts without hiring them. So that's a bit of a problem that I'm sure the publisher will get onto, I hope. Graham, Graham Vernon, in the Ligeti, is every transposition section played on a single fingering? Yes, it is. So it actually feels very strange to play, because the effect is very often that we're playing on a fingering that is not, for want of a better word, is not the best fingering for the note. So you very often find you're playing on something that feels unnatural. It's like anything. I mean, you practice it and it starts to feel more natural, but initially it is kind of confusing, I must say. And here's a lovely comment from Frank Horvat. Frank, that's very sweet. Frank is, I don't know if everyone's seeing this chat, but Frank is just saying thank you very much. And Frank, you are very, very welcome. Thank you for sending the music. It's always wonderful to receive new pieces, and I really enjoyed working on that. And it says that's all the questions we've had. So, unless anyone else wants to jump in with a question, I think we'll wrap it up. So next week, next Monday, 5 p.m, Melinda Maxwell will be exploring the oboe. That's all from me. Bye for now.